Let's do some drywall.
Hello everybody, today we're doing a drywall repair in a bedroom. Someone locked their dog inside the bedroom and the dog clawed and chewed through the walls. I've seen it all now. But believe it or not, this is more common than you think, especially puppies. If you have a puppy and you keep them in the room, they will scratch at the walls. Certain breeds of dogs will do this. So if you have a puppy or a very active dog and you leave, sometimes they get separation anxiety or whatever. So just better to kennel your dogs, because this is what they'll do. They'll keep scratching at the drywall. I've seen dogs that actually scratch through the sheetrock and scratch all the way through the stucco on the other end. So the dog can get hurt, especially this dog almost hit the wire here. If he would have scratched and chewed through the wire, it would have probably electrocuted him and probably been a bad situation. But the good thing is he only damaged the drywall here, so it's an easy fix. But the homeowner is going to be out several $100s in repairing this over a dog that should have been put in a kennel instead of just trapped inside the room. But we're going to go ahead and get this repaired. Enough with the dogs and the homeowner's decisions. We're just here to fix the drywall. Basically, I'm just going to do the same thing like all the drywall repair process. Going to mask off the floor. I'm working with my buddy today, so we're going to get this done pretty quickly. He's just using a level. You can use a level or a piece of wood. You're just basically going to mark off all the sides of the patch. You don't want to cut out a huge area, so you just want to go past the damage. He's using a pencil, and then he's going to cut out the areas using a sawzall. If you're going to use a sawzall technique, don't go too deep with the sawzall blade. Sheetrock's about a 1/2 inch thick, so you don't want to go past a 1/2 inch with your sawzall blade. Sometimes these sawzalls jump around. They're kind of aggressive. So only if you know what you're doing, use a sawzall technique like my friend here. If not, you could just use a hand keyhole saw or a razor blade and cut out each patch. But basically, just cut out the areas. What he's going to do, he's going to cut out each area, and then he's going to mark the measurements on top of the sheetrock. This is one technique of doing it. Some people actually like to cut out a little piece of drywall and put it against the wall and then temple it out. You can do that technique too. There's nothing wrong with that. But we're working as a teamwork here, so this is pretty efficient what we're doing here. He's going to get them all cut out. He's going to take his measurements. We're not keeping the scrap drywall. I'm not hauling it out because it's just a rental property. And they gave us in and out price, basically, what we did this for. Get the measurements. Once he gets all the measurements, I'm going to go behind him with some 1x2s. You can use 1x2s, 2x2s, 2x4s, wood sheeting. Some guys even like to use those metal drywall brackets, whatever it takes. You just got to get some backing behind it. You can add some screws in existing sheetrock. If the existing framing showing, you want to pull the old nails out or screws. But I'm adding backing. These 1x2s are easy to go to. They only cost like less than $2 for an 8-foot stick. Any wires, anything looks bad, you're going to want to address it. You can tell in one of the areas the wire got kind of bunched in there, but it's still a good shape. If there was any problems with it, then I would have definitely showed it to the homeowner. They have metal brackets on the wire framing, so they're good to go. Add plenty of screws. Also add screws on your outside sheetrock to tighten up the old sheetrock. Once I get all my backing in, I'm basically going to take all my measurements. He already went through and he put the measurements, so I'm just going to use a piece of scrap drywall, or you can use a piece of pen and paper. Just write the measurements down. You can cut them in the room, but with me, I have the sheetrock outside with a T-square, so it's going to be easier for me to take all my measurements down, and I'm going to just go outside and I'm going to basically cut out 10 puzzle pieces. Sometimes it might even be easier if you just cut out all the patches. Say, let's do just one measurement for all of them. So it might even be easier to do it that way. Now, after cutting all these, I thought that would have probably been an easier technique. Just make them all the same size and cut all the patches the same size. But it is what it is. These bigger patches, I'm going to use longer pieces of wood, some 1x2s. But it's pretty simple. You know, I'm not going to sit here and talk around it. There's no commotion going on in the video because I'm working together, two guys on a job site, music, in someone else's home. So I'm just basically doing a talk over step by step. I'm basically going to have to watch it and see the process. We're going to get this all sheetrocked and get it taped with fiberglass mesh tape. I'm basically with the fiberglass mesh tape, after the areas have all been sheetrocked, plenty of screws, no screws sticking out, all the screws are nice and recessed. I'm going to go through with a 6-inch knife and I'm going to scrape all the patches. That gets rid of the goobers and anything on the cut seams. You don't want to tape over it and there's some piece of drywall sticking out or something like that, so it just turns into a nightmare of mud. So that's why you always pre-scrape all your areas before you fiberglass mesh tape. I use a spray glue. That's an optional product. It doesn't have to be used. The only reason I use a spray glue, especially when we're taping on old sheetrock, is that the old sheetrock is dusty and the fiberglass tape doesn't like to stick as well as it should. There's some adhesion properties on the back of the fiberglass, but it's not a strong glue adhesion on the back of it. So I just do spray glue, optional product. Fiberglass mesh tape. I know there's so many tapes out there, paper tapes and fusion tapes. This type of tape, this type of tape. When in doubt, just buy fiberglass mesh tape. I'm telling you, I've never had any issues with it. I've never had to steer out of my lane looking for new products. I use fiberglass mesh tape on all my repair jobs. I never had a re-crack out, call back on any stuff cracking out with fiberglass. If it's used correctly, it'll hold and it's a strong material. Sometimes you might have a big gap in a wall or something like that. Then you might want to pre-fill it or do 2 layers of fiberglass just in case. But basically, once you get the fiberglass on, you're just going to strike it in and fill it in. But you'll see that on the next part video on the coating. This first part's just getting all these patches sheetrocked, hung. 10 patches. Seems like a lot of work, but believe it or not, we got it done within 2 or 3 hours at the most on a Saturday. At that, Saturday morning, in and out. These people, hopefully they got a cage for their dog because this is pretty bad. I don't know. If my dog did this to my walls, I'd definitely have to get some obedience classes for them or get them a dog crate. But it's a common issue, and it always happens in people that are renting. I don't know if renters don't want to take that extra time, but if I came into my property and the renters did this to my property, it'd probably create a big lawsuit or a bunch of deposit holds or something. So if you do have a dog, this is a common issue, especially puppies. Baseboard's the worst when they chew up baseboard because baseboard's a lot more work to remove and replace, primer, and paint it. So luckily then they just got the sheetrock damaged here. But just follow along. It's a boring video, I know, but this is just basically the step process. This is what this channel's for, so you can learn how we do the drywall repairs. I know there's other videos out there. Everybody has their own technique, but I work 6-7 days a week, every day, doing the same stuff. Patching, stress cracks, patches like this, in and out type jobs from start to finish in one trip. So that's why we use these fiberglass mesh tapes, get everything nice and secured so they never crack out and never have any issues. But go ahead and follow along. Also, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. You can like the video. You can add a comment. Everybody always has their opinion. Go ahead and leave an opinion. But this is going to be the first part. I'm going to do a 2-part video. So the second part will be doing the coat process and the texture. This is just getting it all sheetrocked and getting all these patches hung. 10 patches. 10 patches in one bedroom. A 10 by 10 bedroom, there's 10 patches. That's crazy. Also, add plenty of screws. I like to do screws every 4 inches or so. And you want to get them on all sides. You necessarily don't need all 4 sides screwed off, but at least top and bottom or side to side, nice and tight. And you notice I got the backing. I'm putting a screw on the outside sheetrock edge and on the new sheetrock edge. Center stud placement, backing placement. Any pieces that are too tight, you just whittle them down with the razor blade. That's why you always want to keep nice new razor blades in your sheetrock knife. They do wear out quickly. They're not as good as they used to, so every job you have to switch out your razor blades. Nice and tight. If there's little gaps, no big deal. Just make them fit. Put plenty of screws every 4 inches or so, nice and tight. Go through, scrape them off. Spray glue's optional, and then fiberglass them. Basically, the same process each patch. I'm just moving on to each patch, doing everything. Move on to the next patch, do everything. Yada, yada, yada. Pretty simple, easy, easy, easy. You watch plenty of these videos, you too will probably be a professional drywaller. But hopefully you only have to do drywall one time. That's probably why you're watching these YouTube videos, see how you do it. You can watch this video too. I also have a whole playlist of doing patches and stuff. So, after you watch this video, you can watch a few other videos. Maybe get comfortable on the process. You kind of see the process, say, okay, I know how to do this now. I think I can handle it. If you don't think you can do it, or if you don't want to go through the trouble of buying all the basic materials, the supplies, just call a professional. Or maybe you're confident in at least getting the sheetrock patch hung or getting it squared up. Do your comfortable level, your comfort level on this. Cut it out. Do whatever you can. Maybe it could save you some money. The day before this job, I went to a job and the homeowner actually cut out all the patches himself and sheetrocked it. And all he did was wanted me to do all the taping and mudding and texturing. So he saved a lot of money on his project. Alright, time to do some mudding. This is 5 minute here. So just use powder form. If you don't want to use hot mud, quick set mud, just use a joint compound. Joint compounds have to dry overnight. But we have to finish this job in one trip, so we're going to use a hot mud. 5 minute mud, 20 minute mud, 40 minute mud, all work great for quick set. It's more professional grade material. Let's go ahead and mix a full pan. Fresh water. Just mix it up slowly. Don't make a big old mess. That's why you don't fill up your pan all the way to the top with powder, so you give enough mixing room. Plus, I'm using a bigger pan. I like to use 18-inch pans. Most pans sold in the stores are like 12-inch pans. It's easier with the hot muds just to do a pan at a time. Some guys mix a half a bucket or so. If you're going to mix more materials, you better use it all up and get it all cleaned up before it dries. So that's why we work with a pan at a time, and still pretty efficient and get a lot done. Mix it up thoroughly, no clumps. Alright, so on here we're going to start the first coat. A lot of guys like to pre-fill gaps before they fiberglass. That's fine. Or you could do this technique where you go over the mud really tight. When you push down tight with your knife, it's going to force that mud inside the crevices of the fiberglass mesh and fill in the gap. This is a good technique to use with hot muds. Just pull it tight. That's all you're doing. You pull it tight, coat, and then it's going to fill in the crevices. And then you can follow through and do a nice first coat over it. That way you ensure the mud gets inside the crevices, the gaps, you don't get any cracks. This technique works. I know a lot of people criticize it doesn't, but it does. I never have any callbacks. My jobs I have to warranty for a minimum of 2 years. Never have any callbacks. But get it all coated out. Like I said, we're using a hot mud here. If you use hot muds, you better know what you're doing with muds. If this is your first time ever patching a hole in a wall, do not use hot mud materials. If it's your first time, just use a regular joint compound. Don't use spackles, don't use hot muds, just use a regular joint compound. Joint compounds have to dry overnight, 24 hours, and then you sand in between coats. So you let the first coat dry overnight, then you sand it like 80 to 100 grit sandpaper, then you'll do a second coat, let it dry overnight, and then maybe sand it with 150, and then if need be, do a third coat. If really need be, do a fourth coat. But with these hot muds, they're less forgiving, so they're more professional grade materials. Literally, they start to set up like this. We're using a 5-minute, and it's literally going to start setting up before we even get the full pan on. The mud's setting up. So if you use hot muds, you got to use the mud up quick. You got to get your tools cleaned out before it dries, and you have to get right back on the patchwork and slick them out with a sponge and 6-inch knife before the mud fully dries and cures. With hot muds, you never let the mud set up completely without doing a sponge slick out technique. You don't let them dry. You don't let them dry to sand out. Everybody thinks you sand hot muds. I never ever sand hot muds ever. Joint compounds, you sand. Hot muds, you slick out technique as they're starting to set up. But yeah, we're just going to go through and do a nice first coat on all these patches. I'm just doing a pan at a time, so I'll probably do 2 pans, 3 pans of mud. Get everything coated heavy. This is a rental property, of course. That's why there's all these holes in the house. Sometimes the renters, they just do whatever. So we're just doing a nice heavy first coat on everything. If you do a heavy enough first coat and you know how to work with hot mud, sometimes you get away with a 1 coat and then slick it out. You put the mud on heavy, but most of the time you're going to need at least 2 coats of hot mud. But we're going to go through here. We're going to get everything coated out heavy, and then we're going to sponge it with a 6-inch knife, and then we're going to let it set up a little more, and then we're going to follow through and do a skip trowel texture. Depending on your region, everybody has different textures. This is a skip trowel. It's done in the newer tract homes out here, at least houses that are 5, 10, 20 years old have this skip trowel out here. Depending on your region, you may have a different texture, but getting the patches coated is the same process. Get the patch demoed out, get it framed, backing, sheetrock, patch it in, tape it, first coat, second coat, if need be, third coat. If it's still really rough, do a tight fourth coat, and then you can just leave it smooth or do the texture. There's so many different textures out there. We got spray textures, knockdowns, orange peels, splatters, skip trowels, smooth, Santa Fe, popcorn, crow's foot. There's 100 different textures out there. So depending on what you're trying to do, sometimes it might be easier just to at least patch up the hole and leave it smooth until you get around to matching the texture. But just follow along. This is just coating process, mudding and getting it all ready for texture. You can see with the hot muds, I'm waiting until they're starting to set up, and I'm just following the edge. I'm also going to take the sponge out past the patch area to get any dust, anything off the wall, so my texture sticks, because I like to feather the texture out past the mud patch area. You go every which way, slicking it out, pulling your mud. You're basically kind of like a wet sanding technique. Anybody that ever worked with like cements or clays, it's kind of like the same process. You're letting the material set up, and then you're manipulating it. You're taking off the extra material, pushing where it needs to go, and doing this technique just takes practice. Using a clean 6-inch knife and a damp clean sponge. Sometimes I keep a bucket of fresh water next to me so I can keep my sponge clean and wet, keep my tools clean as I'm slicking out. But go ahead and follow along. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do subscribe. Give me a like. We have several other videos on the channel like this doing patching, so maybe you can watch a few videos and you too can be a drywall professional. Like I said, if you never done any mudding before, just stick to regular joint compounds. You'll go to the home improvement store, you'll see a bunch of different muds there. The joint compounds is the go-to product, and there's a lot of different ones. There's lightweight joint compound, this and that. Just stick with an all-purpose joint compound and you won't have no problems. At least with the joint compound, if you put the mud on too heavy or you make a mistake, you can at least sand away your mistakes. And if it ain't put on heavy enough, you can always add another coat. Go through all your work, make sure everything's slicked out, get rid of that edge. We call it feathering the edge, is basically the mud edge where the mud patch meets the existing wall. So you want to get rid of that edge. You don't want a big heavy edge. You want to fade it out so you don't see the patch once you paint it. With this, I'm just going patch by patch by patch, since there's 10 patches in the room. Catching them as they're starting to set up. I used a 5-minute, so I'm literally on these patches within 4 to 6 minutes as they're setting up. Sometimes they won't set up right away. Usually if you do it on a semi-gloss painted wall, they take longer to set up, or if your water's dirty or fresh. So sometimes it doesn't set off as quick as it should. No matter what, you just go through it. If it's not setting up fully, just come back to it as it's starting to set up. Easy hot mudding technique. The reason we use hot mud is because it's a stronger material and it doesn't shrink back. It never cracks out because it almost sets up like a plaster cement. Strong stuff, the strongest stuff on the market. We also use it because we have to finish the jobs in one trip. I couldn't keep coming back to these jobs the next day and then the following day to finish a job. I couldn't make a living doing that if I was driving all over, back and forth, back and forth. So that's why we use these hot muds. It takes a little more energy to use, a little more technique. Once all the hot mud's set up, now you're ready to turn around and do a texture. With here, we're doing a skip trowel. With most textures, I always use just a creamy, thinned joint compound. You don't thin it like water, it's thin like a heavy pancake batter. You don't want it soup mud or just fall off your knife. So you need it thick enough, but thin enough to do it. And with the skip trowel, I'm just using a 6-inch knife. I know in a lot of videos, guys use a big old 18, 24-inch knife to do skip trowel. That's fine and dandy if you're doing whole walls, brand new sheetrock, everything's level and perfect. With these patch jobs, sometimes it's easier to have better knife control to do a patch, blend it into the existing using a nice straight 6-inch knife. Skip trowel patterns, sometimes they go a certain direction, so you want to check the existing texture and make sure you're going the correct direction. Some go up and down, some go side to side, some go every direction. So you want to go with the same direction as existing skip trowel. I go on the jobs all the time and I'll notice a patch in the ceiling or a wall because the texture's going the opposite direction. Guys are not paying attention. They just slop the mud on and they think they're doing a good job, but it's going the wrong direction. So you want to follow the direction. And also, skip troweling is not like coating. You're not pushing down hard on the knife. You're not floating it out or nothing. You're literally just scooping up a level amount of mud and you're just letting the knife just glide or skip across the surface, and it creates this skip trowel texture design. The only way to perfect your skip trowel design is just to practice on an old piece of sheetrock until you get the mud just right, until you get your technique just right. It's not just by watching a YouTube video you know how to skip trowel. This takes years and years of messing around to perfect your skip trowel. Also, the mud has to be creamy, no clumps in the mud. If you have clumps and goobers in your mud, you're going to have to strain it with like a metal mesh spaghetti strainer or something to get those clumps out. So a nice fresh box of mud mixed up really, really good will give you the good, creamy, perfect texture. If you have clumps in there, you're going to pull scratches. You're going to be getting real angry really fast. So the mud is perfection for this kind of texture. Depending on your region, you may have a different type of texture. You may have like a smooth wall or something. If you had just a smooth wall, smooth patches, you would just follow through and do a really tight skim coat with a joint compound. If you had spray textures like a knockdown orange peel splatter, then of course you'd have to use the hopper and the compressor. But the mud consistency and the joint compounds are pretty much the same for most of the textures. A heavy, heavy pancake batter that's mixed up thoroughly, creamy with no clumps and boogers in the mud. There are powder form textures out there you can mix up. Those work great too, but with those you got to really mix them up thoroughly and get all the clumps out of them. I've seen guys have to actually pump the mud through a pump to strain it, or you have to sit there and actually strain every bit. So sometimes you'll mix up a full bucket and then you'll have to take a strainer and dump it through the strainer and do another bucket. So that's why we use the joint compounds, because they're easier to work with in the field. But just watch along, pretty simple, just doing skip trowel, doing one patch at a time, moving along to the next patch. Finish one patch, move on to the next patch. Before you know it, they're all done. Easy, easy, easy. With skip trowels and any textures that you use a joint compound with, you're going to have to let the mud dry overnight. That means don't touch the patches. Don't let no kids, no animals near the patches, because kids and animals love to go into the texture. Curiosity. You get a handprint or a dog nose print the next day if you don't keep an eye on kids and animals around textures. Some people like to put fans on their patches or quick dry them. I don't recommend this. I just recommend if you do have a fan, just leave it on in the room. You can open a window. That way you can get the humidity out of the room. You don't want to force the patch to dry with direct wind blowing on it. You can, but I don't recommend it because it might dry too fast and cause hairline cracks through the texture. So sometimes you just want to let it dry overnight on its own. If you do have a fan in the room, that's just to push the humidity out of the room. Get the humidity out of the room, get fresh air in the room to help it dry a little faster. Also, some guys like to use hot muds to texture. I don't like to use hot muds personally. I know a lot of people are trying to do the patch all at once and get it all painted at once. Sure, if that situation calls for it and has to be done that way, then do it. But I recommend just using a joint compounds. They are a creamier, nicer finish material, and you'll get better results if you just texture it and then let it dry overnight and then sand it the next day. Sanding, if you do have to sand drywall patches, I recommend using like a 150 grit to 220 grit sandpaper, or use like a fine or medium sanding block. And all you're doing is really sanding the outside edges so the edges of the patch blend into the existing wall, and just kind of glide over the patch with the sanding paper or sanding block. And that's just to knock any burrs and roughness out of the texture. You're not grinding down the texture. You're not trying to remove the texture by sanding it away. You're just literally gliding over it, just letting the sanding block or sanding paper do the work. Not much muscle behind it. You're just gliding the paper or the sanding block over the patch area. A little more energy, effort on the outside edge, and then you'll be good to go. You can also dedust it if need be by taking a slightly damp cloth or sponge, go over it, take the dust off of it, and then of course use a primer. I recommend a PVA drywall sealer on all drywall, or Kills 2 latex. These are the two go-to primers. If you don't use a primer, you're going to soak up a lot of expensive paint on these patches, and more than likely they're going to flash. Flashing just means the color looks the same, but you can still see the patch, because the patch is going to soak up all your materials you put on it. So that's why you use a primer, because a primer seals the pores of the texture. And it just, so when you go to paint, the paint just goes on the patch. It doesn't try to soak into the center, especially the center of the patch where it's really thick in mud is going to soak up all your paint. And you can do 2, 3, 4 coats on it. It's still going to try to soak into that patch. So that's why you use a primer. Primers are cheap, paint's expensive. So always primer your drywall patches before paint, and you should have a good, successful, perfect patch. But yeah, I hope these videos are helpful. This is just a simple video of patching. Dog, I don't know what happened here with their dog. It's not my responsibility. I'm just here to fix the drywall. But dogs do chew through walls, especially puppies. So if you have a troublemaker dog, puppy, crate train them until they get used to being alone. I don't know what happened in this situation. Looks like they used the bedroom as the dog's room, and the dog was really trying to get out. Separation anxiety, who knows? I don't know. Not my problem. I'm just here to pay to do the work, and that's as far as I get involved with these jobs. Get them done. Get on to the next one. Simple, simple, simple. Hope this video was helpful. You can like, subscribe, leave a comment. Also, I have a bunch of other videos, patching, stress cracks, stuff like that. I think I have a whole playlist of just patching holes. So you can watch a few videos and you can kind of get the idea of the process I do. Everybody has their own techniques, but this process works. Like I said, if you're not good at mudding, you never mudded before, just stick to a joint compound. It'll take a little longer to do the patch, but take your time. You'll get a perfect patch using joint compounds. You just have to sand them in between. And if you're not comfortable doing any type of texture matching, just get the patch all skimmed out nice and smooth. Nice perfect patch. And then maybe you can call a professional in to just come in and texture it. Or do what you can. Like I said, you can maybe at least cut out the whole square, get it to that point. Maybe you can frame it, get sheetrock in. Do what you're comfortable with before you hire a professional, and you may save a few bucks. But if you really butcher it up, it may cost you more. So if in doubt, just hire a professional. Just do your comfort level, what you can do, what you have on hand. Sometimes just doing a simple patch, if you don't have the basic materials, will cost you a lot of money. So it might be beneficial just to hire someone to do it. By the time you go buy basic mud pan, knife, tape, screws, sheetrock, muds, by the time you already get the basic materials that you need to do a small patch, you could already had someone come and do it and been done with it. All right.